when you migrate to Australia, you realize that you're not like everybody else. And so you start grappling with the reality of your identity. As a younger person in Australia, I found that we try to assimilate so that we don't stand out too much. Because if you stand out too much, you get picked on, right? You don't want to be that person that gets picked on. But you also want to be true to yourself. And sometimes when you're younger as well, it's difficult for you to actually understand that all you want to be is yourself. It's always good to have a community of people because the double identity of migrants.
There are many stories out there of strength, resilience, and courage, and we are on a mission to bring them all to you. Welcome to Empowered Voices Amplified, a podcast brought to you by Skilled Migrant Professionals magazine.
Our guest today is Blossom Anyimba-Cooley. Blossom is a driven and dedicated professional with a wealth of experience in diversity, equity, inclusion, accessibility, and belonging initiatives across various sectors. Originally from Nigeria, Blossom has a certificate in diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, and a master's of journalism. With a diverse career spanning state and federal government, private and non-profit organisations, Blossom has been instrumental in enhancing workplace experiences. Her expertise lies in recruitment strategies, staff retention, policy improvement, and training programs aimed at fostering inclusion. Her collaborative efforts with Black writers from Western Sydney and West Words resulted in the publication of a captivating collection of narratives in 2021 titled Smile Across the Ocean. As a researcher, amplifying the voices of people of colour through our accurate data collection is close to Blossom's heart. Her belief is that data and information should not be excluded, and she's passionate about bridging these gaps. Based in Canberra, Blossom lives with her husband and 2 children. Having lived in various regions across Australia, including Western Sydney, Queensland, Victoria and New South Wales, she brings a rich tapestry of perspectives and experiences to her work. Welcome to the show, Blossom.
Thank you, Sandra. I loved hearing you say it. It's different living an experience, putting it down and hearing it in somebody else's words. So thank you for doing a lot of justice to my bio.
Oh, well, it's there's so much to do justice to, so you're welcome and welcome to the show. The first question we want to ask you, and we ask most of our guests, is what were your expectations of Australia before moving here, and how has the experience been for you?
That's an easy question because I didn't have to make the decision. Unfortunately, my mum bore the brunt of the decision making to migrate. And we essentially did because my mum's migration journey started off in the UK and most of her family members are still there. So I guess in terms of where my family is, I would say Australia and then the UK. And then, of course, it would be Nigeria. I think that's how I would list where my heritage is. So in the UK, she was a registered nurse. And then she kind of got stuck in the UK at the time when they were reviewing some of their migration policies for migrants. So she was just paid to study nursing as a student. And after that, she was unable to practice once she finished. The migration laws and policies around that changed. So even though she came on a tourist visa years ago, it was fine. She could study, but then after a period of time, she became an illegal migrant and couldn't work. So she started to find or seek other opportunities outside of the UK. And and my uncle was in Australia. And so he said, why don't you come on down? And a year later, we were here trying to make a life for ourselves. And it's been a very, very interesting, character defining time for all of us. When I say all of us, I mean myself and my siblings and my mum and everybody else that we've met along the way. And I'm sure yourselves too, because I know that you're both migrants. So
excellent.
But yeah.
And how's your mum gone now? Is she working in her profession? now in
Yeah, so
Australia?
she's a psychiatric nurse. She's been doing that since she came here. She worked for the same employer. There's always that sort of loyalty when you have been kind of saved, I guess.
What are some of the key obstacles or setbacks that you've encountered, and how have you overcome them? And if there were any, what lessons did you learn from these experiences?
From migrating to Australia, I guess the biggest obstacle is always, and it's not so much an obstacle, but it's an awareness that you're different. And I'm sure everyone who's tried to articulate this could perhaps do it better than me. But I think we're all kind of saying the same thing, is that you really struggle to find out who you are because you get othered first. So when you migrate to Australia, you realize that you're not like everybody else. And so you start grappling with the reality of your identity. And I had a blog years ago that I described the double identity of being a migrant. And I think that being a person who's trying to conform and not be picked on, as a younger person in Australia, I found that we try to assimilate so that we don't stand out too much. Because if you stand out too much, you get picked on, right? You don't want to be that person that gets picked on, but you also want to be true to yourself. And sometimes when you're younger as well, it's difficult for you to actually understand that all you want to be is yourself. And how can you be the truest form of yourself when you don't want to be different as well? So the double identity of migrants and children of migrants trying to conform at schools. When we migrated, because I was 17 when we migrated, I'd finished high school in Nigeria, and my entire family tried to force me back to high school because I was still old enough to go back, and I refused. But three of my siblings went, and just watching I didn't have to conform too much, I suppose, in that regard. But watching my younger siblings with rap and music band, and perhaps just struggle with drugs as well for some of my siblings, which I didn't have to go through because I didn't really have that kind of bubble of high school and the invisibility that you have from high school in Australia. But yeah, I think that hopefully gives a bit more clarity and depth to my experiences, Sandra, as a migrant.
Thank you very much for sharing that. Now, Blossom, you firmly believe that workplace inclusion is not just a matter of policy, but a crucial aspect of well-being with a profound impact on mental and physical health. Can you tell us more about how workplace inclusion impacts mental and physical health?
I am pausing very intentionally because this is a serious issue and problem in our society. I think most people, we talk about racism and people who are racist, and we talk about systemic oppression and systemic racism. And it's different to when I was younger, I'd be walking down the streets and someone would call me the N-word, right? And that person would be considered a racist. But we don't consider it racism when we uphold oppression in its various forms. And so I think that racism and the term racist it's a very simplified word to explain the complexity of not only the experiences of minority folks, but also the exclusion that people like me and other people who are a minority of whatever social groups that they are part of. It's a very simplified way to explain a very complex issue that impact not only on our mental health or well-being, but it also doesn't actually explain the generational issues that result from racism or being racialized. And if you have a look at, First Nations communities, for example, and the impact of the stolen generation, for example, or the impact of the displacement. And I know about displacement somewhat because I've been displaced from somewhat from my culture, and I'm Igbo. It's a complicated story. It's very complex, but I do have some understanding, some little understanding of what displacement might mean and what that means for you as a person not actually being able to belong. And some migrants will feel that way too. Again, I mentioned double identity prior when I was answering a question, but being able to understand at a very, 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 very small level what displacement is, like not even able to fathom what that might feel like for an individual going through a world where they don't feel like they are wanted, and every single policy is, again, they're made to feel like they shouldn't be here in their own home and land, and having to go through a very, very terrible time over the last several months where First Nations people have felt like they're not even wanted at all. So I think there are two I don't think we have a word to correctly describe the impact of racism or being racialized in this world, in this country. And and there are so many impacts to people personally, to people.
Oh, I love how you've broken that down, Blossom. I was writing so many notes just from everything that you've said. And, the concept of racism, it reminds me of the work by a good friend of mine, Gloria Tabi, on racism. And she says that we cannot tackle racism when we don't understand what race is. And, she's doing a lot of work around there, and I can't wait to see the papers she releases. But I feel, it's people like her, it's people like you who have an understanding of the impact of these sort of things that should be speaking about this. But, we live in an interesting society, an interesting community. And one of the things that you spoke as well about displacement and conformity, one of the things, and Sandra and I have spoken about this quite extensively, is when people of color in particular do something wrong or perceived as wrong in Australia, there are shouts, and there are shouts, and people are literally banging on ports, send them home, send them home. And most of the people that they want to send back home have been born here. Generations have been in this country. So which home do we want to send them back to? So it's thank you for it's such a heavy topic. It's a really heavy topic, and it's topics that we obviously love experts to talk about, but thank you for sharing your heart. Now, you are the facilitator and founder of Not On My Watch. Very catchy, it's like, okay, not on my watch. A not-for-profit organization that provides diversity and inclusion training to businesses and organizations. Why is this work important to you? You did touch a lot on that, but why in particular is it important for you to link this work to corporate Australia in particular?
So I remember a few years ago, and I had one of those moments where I was just thinking about, it was just before we started the Black Lives Matter movement really just came on, and I was just thinking, I won't let this happen on my watch. And I just thought, my sister was right there, and I said, look, I think I just had an epiphany. This I should have an organization called Not On My Watch, and it's really just about dismantling unconscious biases and helping people understand the nuances of race and racism and racialization, and and what systemic oppressions can actually, how it can impact people. Because what I'd realized was, and I'm sure every single Black person in Australia, brown and Black person in Australia, experienced during the Black Lives Matter movement, that we were outcasts. And I felt very alone that time. And I felt like it was the worst experience that I've ever had in Australia. I came to a realization that perhaps the problem wasn't that there were mean or terrible people, because I knew there weren't. What I thought the problem was a lack of understanding of our lived experiences. And so I thought perhaps if I could do something about giving people like me the opportunities to tell their stories, that maybe there could be hope for us to better understand ourselves, to understand each other, and have a lot more respect and empathy for the experiences that we've had. So that's how Not on My Watch was born.
So how do
And
you see corporate Australia and, just businesses in Australia, how can they be more deliberate about the way they work or the way that they have inclusion and diversity policies?
I think the big thing is, and I have a journalism degree, and I'm all about stories. Storytelling is so important, and DEI, and I've done DEI in corporate. DEI is so much more than the numbers, and there is a lot of focus on numbers, on data, on and that's it's beautiful, it's great, but DEI is about people and not numbers. And so Not on My Watch is about, I want to create a network of people who can tell their stories to other people, to corporations, to organizations. I don't want to do it by myself. I want to have a network of people all around Australia telling their own stories by themselves through workshops. I think that that's the only way that we can combat unconscious biases. We can combat racism and any form of microaggression, because people don't actually truly understand what it looks like to live like another person. Some people might find it easy to do. Some people are quite empathetic, but that not everyone is like that. And I think that once we can be honest about our stories and be given the opportunity to tell our stories as authentically as possible, because I can't speak for every brown and black person. I can't speak for every Nigerian. I can't even speak for every Igbo, my tribe. So my experiences are uniquely mine. And we should be in a world where we let other people or people to tell their stories as authentically as it is for them, and be gracious enough to listen and learn from those experiences, and most importantly, find ways to support those people in their workplaces. And we spend a third of our lives at work, and it shouldn't be a horrible experience.
That is so true. Again, most of the stuff that you've brought up really eye-opening, and it's it just, I don't know, it's doing a lot of things. It's evoking a lot of emotions for me. And what you said exactly about lived experiences and how that's different for everyone. Sandra and I have had, again, extensive talks about this, and it's easy for people to make assumptions. So it's easy for people to look at me and make assumptions. It's easy for people to look at Sandra and make assumptions. But we all have unique stories on the journeys that we've been through. And if we looked at each other more with empathy and understanding, I really think that our communities will be better for it, and not merely dismiss each other or make assumptions about each other based on just the way someone looks. It's such a shame. It's such a shame. Well, what actionable advice or tips do you have for women who may be facing, who may be going through things like exclusion, who are not included? What strategies or tools can they use to navigate difficult situations and thrive in Australia?
It's a really, really tough one, Em. It's hard because it's always good to speak up, but you need to be mindful of where you are speaking up and to whom. But I think the biggest thing is always to document everything. Document as much as you can. Australia loves a proof, and if you can have your a proof of every single interaction that you've had, who you've spoken to, kind of supports that you've received, but also get professional help. Every organization that I know has EAP, Employee Assistance Program. And if they don't have somebody who might understand you, then Medicare has 10 hours of psychology that you can get for support. Like there is, and you can find a psychologist that is in your community that might be able to help you. But I think that the first step is really in being aware of your environment. and seeking allies within that environment. And if you're in a position where there are no allies, then I would suggest that you leave, because there is no job worth dying for. Because the more you're in there, the worse it will get. And the earlier you leave, you can still save yourself, and you are absolutely 100% more important than any job. And I've been in a position where I have had to leave my job. And it's better to leave your job and be behind in your savings, or not, or have to ask for, for extensions with your mortgage, than die at work.
That's really
Another
good
thing that would
advice.
be really, really good is having a
Mm.
community of people in your community that you can talk to. I have a group of women that are in different parts of the world. We all went to high school together. We all migrated to different parts of the world, but we hold each other's hands. We're all mothers. We have very similar interests. We've all been to the same school, even though we live in different parts of the world. We hold each other's hands through very difficult times. It's always good to have a community of people, because it will give you some level of sometimes you need a reality check, and not everyone can do that. But also just making sure that you don't live in your head, so you have people in your life that you can tell what's going on with you.
Mm. That's important. Do not live in your head. That just creates more problems. Blossom, what motivates you to keep pushing forward, even in the face of challenges? What keeps you inspired and empowered to continue your journey?
So I've always been of the belief that we are here for a purpose. And I think for me, that's the only way that I've been able to make sense of the world. There are so many difficulties and challenges, and I and having had family members who struggle a lot with mental illness and all that kind of stuff, and working in the space where you work with people all the time who struggle with understanding the world. I think for me, I've always been able to make sense of the world in the way that I feel that I am here for a reason and for a purpose. And that purpose is to leave the world better than I came to it.
Mm.
And that can be a lot for different people. It can mean different things for different people, actually. And I think my biggest criticism of diversity, equity, and inclusion in workplaces is mostly that it is from a Western feminism perspective. And it really removes all the intersectionality of all of our experiences. And so when you come in and you realize that you can't see yourself celebrated in any way or included in any way, you start to wonder if you're wanted there. But also, most importantly, if you were to even bring up that you're different, and
Mm.
that the you can't see yourself within this organization, from policies and procedures to frameworks and strategies, then you start getting looked like you're a troublemaker. and
Mm.
and unfortunately, diversity and inclusion practitioners is also about a lot of tick box. It's a lot of, again, that data driven perspective. And it's such an important work, the privilege of being able to support people at work,
Mm.
at where they present the most in their lives, is something that's not lost on me. And so when I have,
Mm.
and it's a lot to do with human resources. And when I have had people come to me saying, I felt threatened because somebody was too, like, I felt like I was, sexually abused here, and somebody says, "Oh, well, that's it's not my business," and I'm like, "No, actually, it is my business. It is your business. We have to make it our business." If somebody comes out to me and says that in another workplace, where somebody said to a First Nations people, telling her story about her family story of being stolen, and someone said that happened 60,000 years ago, get over it. It's my problem. I will
Mm.
carry it on my head, because
Mm.
if it happens to that person, it will happen to me. And people don't
Yeah.
actually see the ripple effect of those kind of racist rhetorics and microaggressions. So if it's if it happens to somebody else, best believe that I will take it on my head, and I don't care what happens. And that's the thing. People who speak up are often villainized. And I can
Yeah.
tell you that years ago, I can tell you that when I was, 18 years old on a train, an Asian girl was getting picked on the train. And I refused to help out because I didn't want to be picked on next, because I knew that mine would be worse. And so I make it a conscious effort, because I do not want to leave that. I do not, every single day, I do not want to leave that Asian girl alone all by herself on that train. So when I show up every single time for people, I show up because I know how I felt not showing up for somebody else. And I know what it's felt like to not for nobody to show up for me. And I do not want anybody else to feel that way. And so what I do is, every time you come to me with your problem, best believe that it's our problem now. And when I do inclusion at work, I make people uncomfortable, not because I choose to, but because we talk about people's lived experiences. You should not feel uncomfortable about somebody telling their own stories. It is their story. And what you can do instead is to think and talk about and ask, how can I make this better for you? And we need to start getting out of our feelings about it, because it's not about us. It's about this person's journey. And how can I make that journey easier?
I really want to thank you, Blossom, for sharing your heart and being really authentic. I think I can't, I'm not sure how Sandra and I are going to recover from this conversation. Perhaps a glass of wine after, Sandra. I think that would be good. But I really do appreciate you sharing. Now, if people want to talk to you or find you, have a conversation, where can they find you?
I am just on LinkedIn.
Mm.
I am, yes, saving my space and making sure that the only thing that can come to me is really opportunities and not anything else. So I'm just on LinkedIn, but you can find us at notonmywatch.org.au.
I love that, protecting your space. That is very important. And thank you. Thank you so much for being a part of Empowered Voices Amplified. We really appreciate you coming to talk to us. It's been an incredibly enriching experience. And thank you to our listeners as well for tuning in to another episode of Empowered Voices Amplified. We hope you found this. If it's made you a little bit uncomfortable, then that's okay. That's okay to feel that discomfort. Sit with it and then take action. And I would encourage you, if you've got something you want to contribute or anything that you'd like to communicate back to us, send us a note and we will take it from there. Thank you again, and enjoy the rest of your day, your week. And if you're listening to this on the train or on the bus, I encourage you to look around you and look out for the little person. Thank you again, and we'll see you later.